Welcome to Warrenton Bible Fellowship. Let's join Senior Pastor John Kuvakas and host John Sellars as they talk about a very controversial and often misunderstood subject, the mark of the beast. In the meantime, be sure to like and follow and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing. God bless you.
Greetings to you all. Thank you for tuning in. I'm John Sellars. I'm here with Pastor Kuvakas, one of the pastors at Warrenton Bible Fellowship. And today we're going to talk about the mark of the beast.
A popular subject, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Pastor. And I've got a couple of questions for you to get this started. Well, first of all, what is the mark of the beast?
Well, the mark of the beast, there's a lot of confusion over it, but it's a mark that people who follow Satan will bear. And there's a lot of concern over what it is and what it looks like and how we get it and that sort of thing. But it's an identifier for people who have rejected Christ and have embraced Satan.
So I've heard over the years, I think even the late 70s, when credit cards were first coming out, my grandfather called his credit card his 666 card because of the notion of not being able to buy or sell without having the same. And of course that was all in jest, but just over the decades we've heard, could this be the mark and could that be the mark? Are we going to be duped in any way?
Well, you mentioned the history of the mark, and that's curious because there were people at the end of the first century when Revelation began circulating amongst the churches. John wrote this incredible summary, the ending chapter of the Bible, and there are the mentions of the mark of the beast. So everybody back then was trying to figure out what it was. And a lot of them thought that the mark of the beast was a Roman coin with the emperor's image on it. And so there's been conjecture, not just for decades, for centuries, eons. So every generation has kind of figured that they've got a handle on what the mark of the beast is. And it's usually involved with some new technology. Now, when we think about technology, we don't think about Roman coins, but that was a technology of the day. The Roman coins fit the descriptions we see, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but buying and selling and that sort of thing. So, through the ages, bank accounts were the mark because you had to have an identifier on a bank account. And this was a place to put your money, and this is a place where commerce took place and that sort of thing. So bank accounts, and then they came up with checking accounts. They've got numbers all over and so on and so forth. You mentioned credit cards. So it's credit cards and microchips. With as fast as technology is developing, it's easy for us to read the scriptures, look at what's going on around us, and go, oh, that's the mark of the beast. Recently there's been a lot of concern over microchips. Everybody wants to embed a microchip somewhere on us. Health identifiers, PayPal, commerce type things, and those folks that are working on technology see these as a convenience, just like they did Roman coins and bank accounts and checking accounts and credit cards and all those things. Back in the 70s, it was barcodes. And I remember reading all these articles about, did you see this barcode has a 666 in it? Don't buy Wonder Bread. We kind of go to extremes trying to identify what this is. But I think the real question is what you brought up. Is it possible for you and me and believers out here to inadvertently take the mark? And so we have this fear that something's going to happen. They're going to try and put a chip underneath us, and all of a sudden we're going to get to heaven. And, St. Peter's standing there, and he's got a tablet with probably an iPad with all of the right names on it. And he's going to look at it and go, you took the mark of the beast. You can't come in. And we're going to be surprised and amazed. And then, I've had people come and talk to me, and they're concerned. Well, if this happens, how will I buy groceries? And so there's, it comes from an incomplete reading of the text, an incomplete understanding of the book of Revelation, how it fits into the biblical narrative, and what it says about those last days, those final days as Christ returns. Now we've been in the last days ever since Christ ascended. So we're in some people call it the church age, but this is the final age, and it's gone on a long time. And skeptics will begin to talk about, well, when's he coming back? It's been over 2,000 years, and agnostics and atheists kind of use that as he's not coming back. By now he would have been here, and of course, we've seen in scriptures that the disciples thought he'd come back right away. Paul thought he'd come back right away. Everybody was just waiting in anticipation, and so we have that idea of the imminent return of him, which means he could return at any minute. But Revelation tells us what that minute's going to look like. There are guidelines in there that if we read the entire book of Revelation, if we're familiar with the rest of Scripture, we find out that Revelation is the end cap of Genesis. We start out in the garden. There's some people there. God has parameters. They violate them. And so there are consequences for their violation. They're put out of the garden. And the rest of the Bible is a return to the more perfect garden. And so this is God's plan, to reveal his glory in the redemption of his people through the sacrifice of his only Son. And Revelation gives us a picture, as well as John can describe, his peek into heaven. Now, I love that, because the imagery in Revelation is, I think it's John just sitting in Patmos. But I don't know, I saw in the heaven there was some kind of shimmering lake and a figure, and there's bowls and candles and horns and all sorts of things going on, and animals that are scary and all kinds of things happening. But in the end, Christ is victorious, and all of his promises are fulfilled. And God brings his children into his presence, and they spend eternity there. Now, that's the point of Revelation. And we can spend an incredible amount of time trying to figure out what all the images mean. And the fact of the matter is that we don't know. So we interpret them in ways that we can understand them here in the 21st century. There's dragons flying around. Those must be helicopters. There's heat, and those must be atomic bombs, and that sort of thing. But every generation has had their interpretation of what they are. And they've all been wrong, and we are too. So in the middle of all this comes this mark of the beast. And so we find out that the people that are going to follow Satan are going to bear some physical sign. And it comes out of Revelation 13, if I can share some of that with you. It's a long passage, but here, this is the beginning of the final battle, okay? And John says, "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head." Now, a lot of people thought this was the European Union, okay? They're probably struggling a little bit now with the ins and outs of the European Union, but they thought that was the mark of the beast coming out of the ocean. "And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth, and to it the dragon gave his power." The dragon is this awful beast that's trying to decimate the world. Gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. A lot of people thought that was Gorbachev. He had a mark on his head, he must be that. And they worshiped the dragon, and he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. And, we try to figure out what those names are and everything. And then there's a second beast. And then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It's a pretty ugly thing. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. Now, this is a significant word here. It makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives all those who dwell on earth. Now, people go, "Oh, that's all of us." But we need to understand the context. We need to keep reading. Telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Now, we know that images in the Bible are either idols or false idols. And so here's what's happening. The second beast is making an image for people to worship of the first beast. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast. This is a perversion of God creating Adam. Satan is always counterfeiting what God is doing. So we got breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who will not worship the image of the beast to be slain. So those who don't worship the idol, the false god, are going to be killed. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, the mark of the beast. Okay? So that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is what?
666.
666. Now, I've got a house in our subdivision whose address is 666. And every time I go by that, I how did that guy feel? I live in the belly of the beast. But there are some translational difficulties here. There are some translators in the very early 2nd century that thought this was 612. We got to be careful not to demonize numbers. But we do have this indication that there is a mark. It'll be on the forehead or the wrist, and it will identify those who worship the beast. Now, this is really important, and so it tells us to watch out for these things so that we should understand them. But if we go back to chapter 6 of Revelation, we see some unusual things, so that we can understand the mark of the beast in context. What we learn in chapter 13 is that the beast has sealed his people. They have an identifier that identifies them as people who worship the beast. Now, we know that Satan can't do anything on his own. Anything he does that seems to be creative is a counterfeit of what God does. So we see this in chapter 6. The seals of judgment are released upon the world. There are 7 seals. And it describes them in the first part of chapter 6. This judgment is falling upon those who have rejected God, those who have rejected Christ. And it describes this incredible series of cataclysmic events. And chapter 6 ends with this, verse 17, "For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" Okay, well, chapter 7 starts with this. After this, I saw 4 angels standing in the 4 corners. Well, the first thing we find out is the angels can stand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? In the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel descending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who have been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, you and I, if we're there
Right.
at the point that Jesus returns, will have a physical identifier that we belong to the Lord in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
On our foreheads.
Right.
Okay? So we see this, and I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000. There's a whole religion based on that. They've had to adjust their numbers recently. From every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then we go over 12,000 from each of the tribes for the 12 tribes. And the only thing we should see in all those numbers is that there's perfection upon perfection.
Mm-hmm.
12 times 12 times 1,000. And, you know, the Jews that would read this would read, oh, this is absolutely perfect. They're not thinking limiting numbers. And so we have God's people sealed at the beginning of all this turmoil. Mm-hmm. And then we have in chapter 13, we have all this idea of, well, Satan's going to seal his too, okay? Mm-hmm. And so in verse 14, in chapter 14 of Revelation, let me see what my reference is here. It's 1. Then I looked, and behold, now this is after the enemy seals his. Behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Mm-hmm. The perfect number of followers for Jesus Christ has his name written on their foreheads. And I think what people miss is that in order to be condemned by the mark of the beast, we have to receive it as we worship the beast, as we worship Satan. We don't receive it so we can buy groceries.
Right.
We receive it because we declare our allegiance to Satan. Mm-hmm. And by that time, those who call upon Jesus Christ as Lord have already been sealed by their Father and preserved. So we don't have to worry about inadvertently taking the seal and getting fooled into getting kicked out of heaven. I think, we go back to the assurance of our salvation, that if our salvation is based on the work of Christ on the cross and can't be undone, then nobody with a microchip is going to take it away from us.
Right. And what I hear you saying is there's very specific things that are happening even before this time. So it's not just going to be next Thursday that all of a sudden there's this opportunity to take a mark. And we won't be duped into something. There's very specific timelines and time frames for this to occur.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, we spoke in the sermon last week that when Jesus comes, it will be abundantly clear to everybody that he has arrived.
Right.
And what we see in Revelation is if you have not surrendered your life to Christ, by that moment, it's too late. So it's not like, oh, here he comes, I better pray for salvation. So the idea that he comes suddenly, he comes quickly, it's like a thief in the night. There's some interesting things in Scripture. It says when people cry peace and safety. There'll be wars and rumors of wars, which we've had throughout the entire history of mankind. Right. I think things seem amplified a little bit right now because news travels so fast. But there's wars, rumors of wars. There's signs in the heavens. There's earthquakes. We're seeing record heat over in the West, and everybody's going last times, last days. Well, yeah, it is the last days, but Jesus is going to come when we don't expect it, and it's why it's important for us to maintain our witness, for us to maintain our spiritual disciplines, for us to live in constant expectation of his return, and the assurance that once we surrender our lives to Christ, we are marked for heaven, and that can't be taken away from us.
Well, thank you, Pastor. I really appreciate the insight that you've given. And if you have any questions still about this, make sure you write in. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you.